Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Caio Vidal. I'm Director of Events and Communication and Marketing at CEBRI. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all here today for our event. We want to thank you, our partners, the Norway in Brazil, and welcome you all for the event Financing Change, Norway's Experience in Sharing Wealth. So, to begin, I would like to call to the stage Ambassador Odd Magni Hood, Ambassador of Norway to Brazil.
Boa tarde, todos e todos. Seja muito bem-vindo para este evento organizado em conjunto pela Embaixada da Noruega, pelo nosso Consulado-Geral, aqui no Rio, e por nossos amigos do CEBRI. Muito obrigado ao CEBRI por tornar possível esse evento muito emocionante para nós. Estamos muito felizes por fazer parte do G20, sob a liderança do Brasil, esse ano. Por isso, temos a honra das visitas do Ministro das Finanças da Noruega, Trygve Slagsvold Vedum, e da Governadora do Banco Central da Noruega, Ida Wolden Bakke. Gostaria também de cumprimentar especialmente a presença da Subsecretária de Política Fiscal do Ministério da Fazenda, Débora Freire Cardoso. Muito obrigado pela presença. Do Diretor de Planejamento e Estruturação dos Projetos do BNDES, Nelson Barbosa. Muito obrigada. E do Conselheiro Consultivo Internacional do CEBRI, Embaixador Marcos Caramuro. Agora vou passar para o inglês. Dear all, for us working for Norway here in Brazil, this seminar is a veritable dream coming true. And we are very lucky to have our very own dream team present, Mr. Vedum, and President of the Norwegian Bank, Wolden Bakke. The topic that the two of you are about to cover is also a story about how to make the almost impossible possible. Through the establishment of a resource rent on oil and gas revenues back in the 70s, smart and foresighted Norwegian politicians decided to set aside parts of this money into a sovereign wealth fund. We all know that this is not easy. It's always very tempting to put revenues directly into the budget and directly into the economy. Today, our pension fund, as we call it, it's also my pension money, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sovereign wealth fund in the world. I'm very often asked about how Norway managed to do this during my time here in Brazil and other places. And I'm very often asked about how the fund can invest more in this or that country, this or that sector, also here in Brazil. Well, here today, we have the opportunity to engage with the two people most knowledgeable on these very topics. And I wish you all a very interesting seminar. Muito obrigado.
Now I would like to call Ambassador Marcos Caramuru. Marcos Caramuru is member of the International Advisory Board at CEBRI.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome you all. I just want to say how proud we are at CEBRI to be one of the organizers of this seminar, to welcome our visitors, to welcome Ambassador Wood, and then our visitors, Minister Trygve Vedum, Governor Ida Bache, and our Brazilian colleagues, Nelson Barbosa and Débora Cardoso. This year, as one of the think tanks organizers of the T20, we organized at CEBRI a number of discussions about macro policy issues, sustainability, the energy transition, cooperation for development, assistance to the very poor. And I think that this topic today covers a number of these areas that we tried to explore during this year. And I'm very enthusiastic that we were able to have this cooperation with the Embassy of Norway. I I'm very curious about the presentations, I must say, and I'll pay attention to all of them and then help to organize a debate to those who want to ask questions. Thank you very much.
I would like to call Débora Freire Cardoso, Undersecretary for Fiscal Policy at the Ministry of Finance in Brazil.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. I would prefer to speak in Portuguese to make me more clear. Boa tarde a todas e todos. Em nome do Ministério da Fazenda e do ministro Fernando Haddad, gostaria de dizer que é um prazer estar aqui hoje, neste painel que tem o objetivo de debater um tema muito caro à agenda do Ministério da Fazenda brasileiro e do governo federal. Agradecemos o convite do CEBRI e do Consulado da Noruega e gostaria de cumprimentar o ministro Vedum, a diretora do Banco Central, senhora Bashi, correto? Cumprimento também o embaixador Rude, o embaixador Caramuru e o diretor do BNDES, Nelson Barbosa. O tema proposto nesse painel, o uso de instrumentos de política fiscal na gestão dos recursos naturais em prol da redistribuição de riqueza e do investimento responsável para o desenvolvimento sustentável, é de extrema relevância para a sociedade contemporânea. O desastre climático que acometeu o estado do Rio Grande do Sul nos alerta a respeito da necessidade e urgência de utilizarmos os instrumentos fiscais e financeiros a nosso alcance para uma transição energética justa, que no Brasil temos chamado de transformação ecológica, a fim de mitigarmos a crise climática e nos adaptarmos ao novo contexto imposto com justiça social. A gestão dos recursos naturais é, sem sombra de dúvidas, um elemento imprescindível nesse contexto. Por muito tempo, as atividades econômicas predatórias aos recursos naturais geraram custos enormes ao meio ambiente e ao bem-estar da população mundial, ao mesmo tempo em que a distribuição dos seus retornos financeiros foi extensamente apropriada por poucos. Mesmo nos dias atuais, em que pactuamos uma série de acordos e objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentável a serem atingidos, ainda temos falhado, nos mais diversos países, em impor limites, em cobrar a contribuição progressiva pela degradação do bem público e em socializar os ganhos econômicos dessas atividades de forma a mitigar as perdas para aqueles que mais sofrem com os danos ambientais e as calamidades, a população mais vulnerável. No Brasil, avançamos nos últimos meses em um primeiro passo. Nos últimos 18 meses, o Ministério da Fazenda trabalhou intensamente para aprovar uma reforma tributária histórica que traz uma completa reformulação dos tributos indiretos no Brasil, promovendo simplificação e harmonização tributária e ganhos de eficiência e equidade por seus efeitos assimétricos nos setores econômicos. Mas essa reforma também é histórica porque introduz na nossa política fiscal, via sistema tributário, um conjunto de incentivos virtuosos em relação à questão ambiental. A reforma inclui critérios de sustentabilidade ambiental e redução de emissões de carbono para a concessão de incentivos tributários regionais, cria um novo princípio constitucional de defesa do meio ambiente que determina que o sistema tributário nacional deve observar, além dos princípios da simplicidade, da transparência, da justiça tributária e da cooperação, o princípio da defesa do meio ambiente, coloca também critérios de preservação ambiental como um dos determinantes para a partilha da arrecadação de tributos subnacionais. Além disso, cria um imposto seletivo com alíquota majorada sobre bens e serviços prejudiciais ao meio ambiente, a partir da previsão de alíquotas diferenciadas em função do impacto ambiental. Entram no imposto seletivo, por exemplo, os automóveis E, muito importante para o tema deste painel, as atividades do setor de mineração, que tendem a gerar danos ambientais irreversíveis. A reforma também cria o Fundo de Desenvolvimento Regional, colocando critérios de priorização de projetos ambientais e os fundos de sustentabilidade do Estado do Amazonas e dos estados da Amazônia Ocidental e do Amapá, com o objetivo de fomentar o desenvolvimento e a diversificação das atividades econômicas do Estado. São passos muito importantes para uma gestão mais responsável e justa dos recursos naturais no Brasil e para a busca dos objetivos de desenvolvimento sustentável, deixando o nosso sistema fiscal mais alinhado ao objetivo da transformação ecológica. A presidência do Brasil no G20 se mostra histórica ao ter como lema um mundo mais justo e um planeta sustentável. Colocar o tema da fome e da redução das desigualdades no centro da agenda de discussão global está alinhado à agenda de política econômica e social que o governo federal está conduzindo internamente no país. Em especial, a Aliança Global contra a Fome e a Pobreza e o apoio a uma proposta de tributação dos super-ricos constituem marcos desses dois objetivos. Entendemos que não há transição justa e efetiva sem que os problemas básicos da população vulnerável, como a fome, sejam solucionados. Também entendemos que a redução das desigualdades, a partir da progressividade tributária, é um dos principais caminhos para obtermos capacidade fiscal para este enfrentamento. É com essa agenda que pretendemos seguir no país. Aprender com a experiência norueguesa sobre o uso de instrumentos de política fiscal na gestão dos recursos naturais, em prol da redistribuição de riqueza e do investimento responsável para o desenvolvimento sustentável, que será compartilhado aqui hoje, certamente é muito importante para nós. Muito obrigada.
I want to thank you, Ambassador Hood, Ambassador Karamuru, and Deborah for their opening speeches. Now, to start our panel and our discussion, I'd like to call to the stage, again, Ambassador Marcos Karamuru, who is our moderator for the panel. I also call Nelson Barbosa, who is Director of Planning and Project Structuring at the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES. I want to call Ida Voldenbache, Governor of the Central Bank of Norway. And I call Trygve Slagvold Vedum, Norwegian Minister of Finance. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Well, let's start right away. I understand that Minister Trygve Vedum is going to start making the first presentation, that he's going to use a PowerPoint. Of course, you're free to decide where you're going to speak from.
Good evening, everyone. And I shall try it more locally. What Hardi? Was it correct? Oh, I'm not sure. But this is it's an honor for me to speak to you about taxing the riches of nature and sharing their prosperity from national resources. We humans have always depended on harvesting the resources given us by nature. Natural resources have generated massive wealth in many countries, countries which are lucky with what nature has provided to them. And in my remarks today, I want to talk about the Norwegian experience, which I think is relevant across borders. Thanks to important political decisions in history, Norway has managed to make sure that its wealth not go directly to a small group of powerful people, but rather to the wider population. Many Norwegian generations, we have asked who should benefit from these values that come from nature around us in our country? A few people or everyone living in Norway? And politicians, both in the past and today, have ended up to deciding that this wealth should benefit the whole of society. We have been lucky that the people with power to make decisions have chosen to put society as a whole first. An important starting point to this is to ensure national control of natural resources, and a decision that all of society should get a fair share in the value created from using the natural resources which we jointly own. Norway is quite an equal society, but still there are some really rich people in Norway and others with less. There are many smart and hardworking people, and some of them have made big financial gains because they had access to the country's natural resources. But the rest of the people in the country have also benefited from this wealth. Can I check? Or can I talk? Yes, thank you. And this is what I want to tell you about today. The story of our economy has been shaped by our natural resources and sharing the value for business, individuals, and society as a whole. And I think we need to ask whether there are new resources that we should treat in the same way, not in Norway alone, but on a global level. When we think about natural resources, we often think about physical things we can see and measure, like land, forest, oil, hydropower, rivers, and waterfalls. I will come back to these things. But I also want to consider the worldwide digital economy and put it in context. It has grown 2.5 times more than the global economy in the last 15 years. What is the one major resource that the technology industry uses? The foundation that allows a few central players to create enormous wealth. It is our data. My data, your data, and the entire digital history of modern civilization. You probably have a phone in your pocket, or have, right now, sending and receiving data while you're sitting here listening to me. The information that you and I leave behind us on all different digital platforms, the new raw material being sold is human data. The industry that uses the data is also in absolute control of the infrastructure, the digital platforms. The digital economy creates fantastic opportunities, but is one of my challenges: who owns this data? Can anyone just take it and create wealth from it, or does it belong to everyone? There are a lot of questions. Let's start with the big and central ones. Should we have a common goal for how to manage the resources and share the wealth generated from this digital economy? Can the value that comes from these assets benefit the majority and contribute to a better quality of life for everyone? I don't have all the answers here in front of you, but I'm convinced we need to ask the questions and find the answers together. And I hope that experience Norway has for the last 100 years may be useful and relevant also for this discussion. So let's go back 100 years to find the roots to the Norwegian approach to jointly owned assets and fair distribution of values. It all starts with this: the waterfalls, hydropower. In Norway, you have called it the white gold. Water is a fantastic resource. It creates huge amounts of clean and renewable energy in Norway. We are really lucky. Just by nature, do the mountains or rivers flow through lots of waterfalls. There are sources of energy that can be used, and you have it in Brazil too. The question is, who does this waterfalls belongs to, and who owns the right to earn money from using it? Let's go back a little bit more. In 1879, the American economist Henry George wrote the book Progress and Poverty. He is best remembered for his ideas about tax on the extra income from natural resources, the so-called land rent, or more generally, resource rent. Henry George had seen had seen a massive speculation and property prices increased in San Francisco in the time before the first railroad across the continent was completed. The railroad companies harvest a lot of these profits. George argued that the income from the extra value of land because of the railroad should be owned by everyone, not just the few people who could earn a lot of money because they controlled the land around the railroad. These ideas about resource rent and taxation reached Norway on the other side of the Atlantic. Towards the end of the 1800s, Norway was formally controlled by Sweden. We gained full independence in 1905. It was a time of strong development of industry and a period where it was important to secure income for the new independent nation. During the last half of the 19th century, investors had started buying up land with waterfalls in Norway. The waterfalls they bought can generate power to drive heavy industry. There was not much capital in Norway in that time. In 1906, 3/4 of the waterfalls which were developed for industry had foreign owners. Our white wall was not under national control. We risked that all the resource rent from the hydropower produced by Norwegian waterfalls was being channeled out of this country and not for the benefit for the Norwegian population. And the question was, could it be changed? And it's not surprised that question caused a tough political fights back then, like than they do today. Some politicians believed that Norway needed to get control over its own natural resources and the value generated from using the resources. Others thought this was madness, that it would scare away investors and much needed capital. An active political debate ended with victory for the ones who argued in favor of national control of important natural resources and the extra income. And we secured national control of the assets and the later tax the income from them to benefit the whole Norwegian people. This is how we managed the riches from the waterfalls. And this is what we did about 70 years later when we found the oil. This is the picture is of Troll A. It's a gas production platform in the waters of the coast of Norway. It's the world's tallest movable man-made structure, and you can see taller than the Eiffel Tower. And it is a symbol of how huge the Norwegian oil industry has become. It was our experience with hydropower, inspired by Henry George, by the thinking of Henry George, which formed Norway's approach to manage and develop newly discovered oil riches. Norway's oil and gas policy today is to collect a large portion of the profits for society as a whole and manage the wealth that gives us with a long-term perspective. We do this through ownership and the tax system, including resource rent tax. We found the oil in 1969. Soon after, the parliament decided the large share of the profits from oil should go to the Norwegian people, society as a whole. And the treat of this was national control and the tax system. And it's important to say, public control does not exclude private stakeholders and businesses. Norway depends on skill and innovation in the private sector. But while the industry needs to make profit, it must share the income from extracting oil and gas with the Norwegian people. We jointly own these natural resources. The understanding we have developed over time is that oil wealth belongs to the whole of the Norwegian people, not just a powerful few, and not just today's Norwegian people, but also future generations. To ensure this, the Norwegian State Petroleum Fund was set up in 1990. This was a fund to secure our future pensions. The governor of Central Bank, Ida von Bakke, will talk more about this afterwards. And the value of this fund is right now close to $1.7 trillion, more than 4 times the GDP of mainland Norway. The profit from this fund help us to provide good public services today and in the future. And in 2001, we introduced a fiscal rule how to spend the income from the petroleum. The fiscal rule means we can use some of the money in the annual state budget, but over time, no more than 3% of the fund's value per year. That is the accepted real return of the fund. The basic idea is firstly that we should gradually phase in the income from oil and gas in the economy in a responsible way. And secondly, we should keep the capital in the fund for the generation that come after us. In this way, all our children, our grandchildren, will also enjoy the wealth we generate from petroleum assets. We are also, of course, mindful about the dilemmas of managing oil and gas wealth in the context of the climate change. This is a large and important topic. The environment and climate is a major part of Norwegian policy towards the petroleum industry. But today, I will focus on Norway's experience and how we manage and distribute extra value from natural resources. So the blueprint for how we manage valuable resources in Norway goes back more than 100 years. Recently, we took this tradition and applied it into some new industries that have external profits from access to the country's commonly owned natural resources, onshore wind and aquaculture, mostly salmon farming. And again, there was a lot of debate. But in the end, the parliament decided on resource rent tax to share the profits with the people. As you know, I'm here for the G20 meeting, which Brazil is hosting now. And I have to say, you are fantastic hosts. It's really useful for Norway to join these meetings. And I'm happy to be here to share Norway's experience. Now I want to connect the experience to reflect on the global perspective. Business is global. People are more connected across the world. We have started to think globally about tax successfully. And we are working together globally to develop solutions. I've been talking about tax as a good thing. As a Minister of Finance, I know very well that many do not think of tax in that way. But let me underline that fair taxes are good for society when we use it for the benefit of the people. Brazil's presidency of the G20 has put hunger and poverty at the top of their agenda, together with sustainable development and a fair energy transition. Norway warmly support Brazil's agenda. Governments need revenues to achieve these important goals. A good tax system and a fair distribution is the key to create a better society, a society for all. This is why I hope the Norwegian experience can be useful. The countries in the OECD and G20, along with dozens of countries, are cooperating to meet the challenges of tax in the digital economy. Not least, how to make sure that the taxation is fair, both for businesses and citizens in all our countries. We have worked together for a long time to achieve harmonized rules. This framework suits today's digital business models and hopefully the business of the future as well. For me, this work is interesting and exciting. And in light of how we Norwegians have thought about taxing natural resources like water, oil, and gas, I'm also inspired to look into new issues for global taxation. In the global digital economy, one sector with extra profits is the tech companies. They earn a lot of income from using the data of humans. It's a digital natural resource, as I mentioned at the start. Let's return to the American thinker Henry George for a minute. In the late of the 19th century, When the railroad was expanding westward, he was interested in the extra income that could be generated from the extra value of central land. What if he had been alive today? How would he have looked at the digital platforms and large-scale AI models? Could we consider it as something like digital railroads? A few companies earn their super profits through building the digital infrastructure, and they depend on our data to generate profits, not just over our digital history, but also our thoughts, emotions, expressions, and interaction. Everything your mobile phone and smartwatch registers. What do you see on the screen? Who you see on the screen? How you are feeling right now? What triggers your happiness? Or what makes you angry? The total of all this information is extremely valuable. Thousands, millions, billions of people join together on digital platforms, and just a handful of companies are controlling them. The assets, the research they can earn from is me and you, our data, our values. Like the land, the oil, the waterfall, the power, our data is the resource. It forms the basis for the super income the platform owners can extract. And just imagine what AI is going to do with the potential to generate even more income from this precious resource. Their business models only works because of the data from you and me and human history. Our common story. This is what adds the value. So should we be thinking of our collective data as the new jointly owned property, the natural resource? And if this research generates super profits, how should these enormous values be shared? Of course, the businesses who invest time, knowledge, capital, and take risks should get returns for their efforts. But shouldn't we at the same time think that the value generated by using our common property, our data, should also come back to the global community to benefit society as a whole? Is this a direction for sharing the wealth generated on our digital world today? Can it be that our data is a resource which generates super profits, and it's something which should be taxed across the worldwide digital economy? I don't have all the answers. No person or country can answer it alone. We need to continue working together internationally and find a joint approach and for common challenges, call for common solutions. But I will say that our history in Norway shows that it is possible to create and share significant value from natural resources, and it can benefit both businesses and the people as a whole. We must learn from our history and joint experience when we tackle these new challenges. Data is different. While physical resources can be taxed nationally by individual countries, the digital world is global, and therefore they also need global cooperation. But I want to ask, is it fair for a small number of people or businesses to become super rich from taking all the wealth generated by natural resources, in this case data, from human thoughts and values? I don't think it is fair. And all of you have a mobile phone in your bag, in your hand, or in the pocket right now. And next time we look at our phone, let us remember the value of our own data, and that we are a valuable resource. We must find a fair way to distribute the financial gain from using our data to the benefit of those who actually generate the resource, the true owners, humankind. So now we then soon give the floor to the governor of the Central Bank of Norway, Ida Wolden Bakke, and she will tell us more about having the whole population as shareholders and how we manage the wealth that we gain from taxing our national resources. But before you give her a warm welcome, remember always, when your phone is active, someone's earned money on your data, on your emotions, on your values, and it's not you. Not yet. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's now listen to Governor Ida Wolden Bakke.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be here tonight and to have this opportunity to speak to you about the Government Pension Fund Global, Norway's sovereign wealth fund. The fund was set up in 1990. The purpose of accumulating Norway's surplus revenues from oil and gas extraction on the continental shelf. And the idea of the fund was to share wealth across generations by transforming a non-renewable resource into a diversified portfolio of financial assets. And partly to avoid an overheating of the domestic economy, it was decided from the beginning that the fund should only be invested in foreign assets. The fund is owned by the Norwegian people, represented by our government and the Norwegian Parliament. The Ministry of Finance holds the formal responsibility for the management of the fund. The Ministry of Finance holds the formal responsibility for the management of the fund, but the day-to-day and operational management of the fund is delegated to Norges Bank, Norway's central bank. The fund has a financial objective. The goal is to achieve the highest possible return given an acceptable level of risk. Within the scope of this financial objective, the fund shall be managed responsibly, and I will return to that in a moment. The overall investment strategy for the fund is determined by the Ministry of Finance. So the investment mandate given to Norges Bank specifies which asset classes we can invest in, it defines a benchmark index, and it also lays down certain risk limits and constraints. And one key guiding principle is transparency. Crucially, all important changes to the fund's investment strategy are deliberated and anchored in Parliament. Now, this ensures democratic legitimacy, and it has meant that we have been able to stick with the investment strategy also in periods of turmoil in international financial markets, taking advantage of the fund's long-term investment horizon and limited liquidity needs. In my view, this has been one of the key success criteria for the fund. For nearly 3 decades, successive governments from different political parties have made substantial annual transfers of petroleum revenues to the fund. Now, this graph shows the evolution of the value of the fund since the first transfer in 1996 to the present in Norwegian kroner terms. The current value of the fund in US dollar amounts is 1.6 trillion. Now, the dark blue area represents the net inflow of revenues from Norwegian oil and gas extraction. But the largest area in royal blue represents the fund's returns. So since 1996, the fund has returned over 9,000 billion Norwegian kroner. You will also see that there's a gray area in the graph. That represents the increase in the value of the fund stemming from the depreciation of the Norwegian krone against the currencies the fund is invested in. Now, these value gains, however, do not increase Norway's international purchasing power. The fund provides the Norwegian government with a substantial fiscal buffer. And over time, the return on the fund has become an increasingly important source of public expenditure funding. In the past few years, more than 20% of government expenditures have been financed with transfers from the fund, in accordance with the fiscal policy guideline. A key premise underpinning the fund's investment strategy is that overall risk can be reduced by broad diversification across geographies and asset classes. And this graph shows the geographical allocation of the fund. So as you can see, while the fund is mostly invested in countries classified as developed markets, nearly 10% of the fund is invested in emerging markets across different regions. The investment strategy has evolved over time. At the outset, the fund was only invested in government bonds. But in 1997, politicians decided to invest 40% of the fund in equities. Now, at the time, this was a really bold decision, as the Ministry of Finance, Noruega's bank, had very limited experience in global equity investing. And in 2007, the decision was made to increase the equity share to 60%. As a consequence, during the global financial crisis, the fund was a large buyer of equities in global markets. In retrospect, that turned out to be quite fortunate timing. The allocation to equities has since been increased to 70%. And the choice of equity share is the single most important decision determining the returns and the risk of our fund. And an equity share of 70% signals that our owners accept a fair degree of variability in annual returns in exchange for higher expected returns over time. Now, the fund is an index-based investor tracking closely the benchmark index defined by the Ministry of Finance. Our equity investments are spread across more than 60 countries worldwide and spread across a wide range of sectors. In total, we own a small share of close to 9,000 companies across the globe. The average holding in these companies is 1.5%. Now, this may sound very small, but in fact, in many companies, it makes the fund one of the largest shareholders. Now, the fund also invests in other asset classes, fixed income, which is split between treasury bonds and corporate bonds, with the purpose of dampening the fluctuations in the overall returns on the fund. We invest in unlisted properties and own about 900 properties, focusing on major cities in Europe, the US, and Asia, invested mainly in offices, retail, and logistics. And finally, in 2020, the investment universe was expanded to include unlisted infrastructure for renewable energy. Since then, we have invested in 5 projects, and the strategic focus so far has been wind and solar power projects in Europe and North America. Now, most of the equity investments are managed by one of our 650 internal employees. But a small portion of the fund's portfolio is also managed by external managers. And the external managers have an advantage in that they are based more closely to the markets in which they invest. And these local experts mainly cover small and medium-sized companies in developed markets, but they also cover our investments in emerging markets. And in fact, external managers handle most of our fund's investments in Brazil. So 0.5% of the fund is invested in Brazil, amounting to $8.6 billion across equities and fixed income. At the end of last year, the fund was invested in 126 listed companies in Brazil, the largest investments being in energy and financials. Now, with a broadly diversified global portfolio and a long-term investment horizon, in many ways you could say that the fund stands or falls with the global economy. And our investment strategy is based on the recognition that the fund's long-term value depends on sustainable economic, environmental, and social developments, as well as well-functioning, legitimate, and efficient financial markets. Now, our approach to responsible investment is to seek to improve the long-term financial performance of our investments. And we also strive to reduce the financial risks associated with the company's social or environmental practices. And we believe that the best way to do so is to exercise our ownership rights and to engage in constructive dialogue with the companies in our portfolio. We set clear expectations of the companies we invest in. And the expectations are based on international standards, such as the UN Global Compact, OECD guidelines, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And this provides the starting point for all our dialogue with the companies. Our expectations for companies address challenges such as climate change, water management, ocean sustainability, and biodiversity. We also expect the companies in our portfolio to respect human rights, children's rights, to have a responsible human capital management, and to understand and address consumer-related risks. Moreover, companies should adopt appropriate and prudent tax policies and be transparent about where they generate their economic value. And lastly, companies are expected to have clear guidelines and take effective action to combat corruption. So how do we work with the companies in our portfolio? We continuously monitor and engage with the companies. Last year, we had more than 3,000 meetings with the boards and management of the companies in our portfolios. And our ambition is to vote at every single shareholder meeting. We put great emphasis on being transparent, both about how we vote and why we vote the way we do. And a couple of years ago, we started publishing our voting 5 days before each shareholder meeting. And if we vote against a board's recommendation, we will always explain why we do so. And all the voting is founded in our expectations documents. At the heart of our work on responsible investment is managing climate risk. In 2022, we published our climate action plan, describing the approach we take to managing climate risk and opportunities. Our actions are targeted at improving market standards, increasing portfolio resilience, and effectively engaging with the companies in our portfolio. The goal of our engagements is for the portfolio companies to align their activities with global net zero emissions in line with the Paris Agreement. On this basis, the ambition is for the companies in the portfolio to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Specifically, we expect that our portfolio companies set clear targets and transition plans and effectively reduce their Scope 1, Scope 2, and material Scope 3 emissions. So far, I've talked about how the fund is invested and how we do responsible investing. However, there are also some companies that the fund is not allowed to invest in for ethical reasons. The Norwegian Parliament has decided that the fund shall not be invested in companies that produce certain types of weapon, tobacco, cannabis for recreational use, or base their operations on coal. Furthermore, the fund shall not be invested in companies that contribute to the violation of fundamental ethical norms. This includes companies contributing to or being responsible for serious and systematic human rights violations, severe environmental damage, or serious financial crime, such as corruption. And the government has set up an independent council of ethics that gives recommendations to Norges Bank about which companies to exclude on the basis of these ethical guidelines. The decisions are then made by the executive board at the Norges Bank on the basis of these recommendations. The exclusions are made public, and also the recommendations by the Council of Ethics. So let me conclude. We strive to be a responsible investor. But our objective is purely financial. The fund is not a political tool. However, this balancing act is difficult and may become more difficult going forward. In a world of wars, conflicts, and increasing fragmentation, the economic and political spheres may be blurred. We already see in some markets that responsible investment practices are being politicized, and some large investors have lowered their climate ambitions. We are not lowering our ambitions, but we will continue to strive to make sure that our expectations are founded in research and internationally recognized standards and principles. And we will continue to strive to be transparent and predictable. Most importantly, we will remain faithful to our investment objective of achieving the highest possible return for current and future generations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Let's listen to Nelson Barbosa.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here, and good evening to everybody. And I also congratulate Minister Vedum and Governor Bakke for very informative presentations about the Norwegian model. It's a pleasure to be here today to hear your explanations and trade experiences. I would like to just make 3 brief points in my talk. One, I first and foremost would like to thank the Norwegian people through the Norwegian government for their contribution to the Amazon Fund. I don't know if everybody knows, but the Norwegian government was made the first and still the main and largest contributions to our Amazon Fund that is managed by BNDES. More than $1 billion of grants, money, to support projects in the Amazon, of reforestation, of human development, of people that are located in the Amazon. And Ambassador, in your name, I congratulate the Norwegian government for that. BNDES is the manager of this fund. And with the Lula third administration, we're resuming the operation of the Amazon Fund. And we recently released a new project. It's called the Arch of Reforestation, where we'll try to, if you will, construct a kind of great green wall around the Amazon. For those who know the Brazilian map, from Maranhão to Acre. And we're going to try to recover degraded lands and preserve the existing forests there. BNDES is also heavily involved in doing that. We are financing recoveries in private lands, and we're also preparing projects on federal land. Right now, we are working with our forest, National Forest Service. We are structuring or preparing projects of forest concessions with sustainable exploration of forest products. The main one is wood, but not only that. And mostly more important, the generation of carbon credits, which can be a major source of revenue for this forest. Right now, BNDES has in process a total area of forest of 9 million hectares, which is closely the size of Portugal. And we are in negotiation with more federal land, state parks and state forests, that can raise that to 200 to 25 million hectares, which is the size of the UK. So this is one opportunity for more corporations. The Amazon Fund covers part of the resources they're using in grants, and we have another instrument by the Brazilian government called the Climate Fund that can also finance those investments with favorable interest rates in Brazil. And I will go back to that in my final speech, because I cannot help having the Norwegian Finance Ministry and the Norwegian Governor of Central Bank to make some sales speech for investors here. My second point is hearing both of your presentations went down some memory lane, because 16 years ago, in 2008, I was Secretary of Economic Policy. It was just after Brazil had discovered huge oil reserves in our continental shelves, what's called the pre-salt reserves. And all of a sudden, our reserves double and then triple. And a major discussion during that time was, what should we do with that? How can we manage such a huge discovery of oil reserves? And as Secretary of Economic Policy, I was in charge of looking around in the world what other countries did. And the main model that we studied was the Norwegian model. How you guys did that, how we reformed that in the early 1990s, creating some new institutions. And I can say that what we have today is obviously not an exact copy of the Norwegian model, but we are very much inspired by that. And for our Norwegian and Brazilian audience, I will just make some comparisons. We looked at the Norwegian model, and when Norway discovers its main oil fields, it decided to create a new system. It created something called the States Direct Financial Interest, the SDFI, in 1985, for the government to have a participation, to be like an equity holder in the main oil fields. Norway already had an oil company, like we had Petrobras. It was called State Oil at that time. But on top of that, they created this system, the SDFI, to be a shareholder in the main oil fields. And through that, they extract part of the oil rent and allocate the money to the global pension fund to do the long-term savings. And in thinking of that, we devised our model in a similar way. To explore these new oil reserves, we created a system, not a typical concession that we had before that, because in these new oil fields, we already knew that there were oil underground. So the risk of exploration was very small. So we copied the Norwegian model and said that whoever wants to explore those fields will have to share part of the excess oil with the government. And the bid was through this percentage. Whoever offered the largest percentage of sharing would win that. And Petrobras would participate, which was our Statoil, would participate in the explorations. Like the Norwegians did, they created a new company just to manage the SDFI, the Petoro company. We created a company just to manage the Brazilian financial interest in the oil fields. It's called PPSA, Petróleo Participações S.A. And it's now managed all the Brazilian direct financial interests in this new oil reserve that were discovered since 2006. And also to receive this, we created a new fund. It's called the Social Fund, which receives most of the oil rent of the Brazilian federal government. This was created by President Lula, 2008, 2009. Since then, it has already accumulated something more, at actual value, more than almost 300 billion reais. But since Brazil is a large country of 210 million people with a very unequal income distribution, we cannot save all of that for future years. So most of it has to be used in every year's budget, but we try to smooth that, not to create the macroeconomic volatility that the exploration of non-renewable resources do. The main objectives of the social fund is to invest in education, social policies, part of that also in sustainable infrastructure. Since then, it has financed a lot of initiatives in education. I will just give you one recent example. At the end of last year, President Lula allocated 5 billion reais to create a new program, an incentive for young people to finish their high school. It's a kind of a special bonus that if you conclude your medium education, you receive a bonus. So for people to stay in school and not leave very early. The other recent applications that, as you may probably have saw, there was a huge flood in the south of Brazil recently, in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. And to finance the reconstruction of Rio Grande do Sul, the government recently allocated 15 billion reais from this social fund. That's not grant, it's a lending, but that's at favorable interest rates, to finance the rebuilding of Rio Grande do Sul. And we created this kind of long-term, if you will, saving mechanism or smoothing mechanism to use our oil rent, inspired by the Norwegian model, but obviously adapting that to the political economy, to political demands of a country like Brazil. I congratulate the Norwegian government for its success in managing its oil reserves, and I would like to stress that your case serves as a good example for all the rest of the world, and Brazil is just one example of how a country that is very different than Norway, but still try to adapt and is benefiting from the lessons that you learn, and you are now teaching the rest of the world. My third point is to say a little bit what we have been doing at the BNDES, and that may be an opportunity for joint collaborations between the Global Pension Fund from a financial perspective, but also that attends to the ESG conditionalities and directives of your government. BNDES is one of the largest development banks in the world. In the emerging market, I think we're the second largest. We are only behind the Chinese Development Bank. If you take out China, we're the largest. Our total assets are around $140 billion, We lend every year around 22 to 23 billion dollars, using many instruments, equities, debt, lending. We offer guarantees, we do grants as the Amazon Fund, but also with other sources. We are a main shareholder. We invest a lot in equities, and we do that either directly, we're a shareholder directly in the companies, or we do that through private equity funds. And more recently, to help Brazilian firms to grow, we have been doing that through private equity funds, where we put usually $100 million, and we allocate, or we are responsible only to up to 25% of the fund, so that we can multiply the capacity. And we do that usually with another anchor investor that takes the other 25%, and then we select on an open bid an asset manager to raise the remaining 50% of the capital. And these funds usually have an investment period of 8 to 10 years, and a disinvestment period, again, of 8 to 10 years, so that we can go in, and then we can get out, helping the Brazilian firms to grow. And Governor and the Minister, here in Brazil right now, we have a very dynamic sector of fintechs, of financial technology, AI, digitalization. We have now 5 of these kinds of funds open for new investors. We just launched another one focused on critical minerals, rare minerals, from mining to processing, also subject to ESG standards. And we are now trying to create new investment vehicles. It can be multilateral, it can be bilateral, and we have very good opportunities. If you take the rate of return of BNDES's equity portfolio, it overpasses the market return by large, like 3 to 4 times. So BNDES is a 72-year-old institution, has been investing in Brazil for a long time. We are the major source of long-term finance in Brazilian currency. If you have any project that is longer, if you need finance for any project that is longer than 20 years in Brazilian currency, BNDES will be involved in that, directly or indirectly. We will either prepare the project, we'll be part as equity holders, or we will be part of the financing. We have a lot of projects in our portfolio. We'll be very much interested in discussing them with your government, with your institutions, and we also look for bilateral collaborations that you see fit. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have a few minutes for the Q&A session. I'm in doubt whether I start asking questions to the panelists or whether I'll give you the chance to ask questions. Since we don't have much time, I think I will prefer to give you the right to ask questions yourselves. If you do not have any immediate questions, I would start the Q&A session. Is there anyone who wants to ask a specific question? Well, if not, let me start. And I'll start with Governor Bacci. I understood from your presentation that, the dilemma is between risk and opportunity. And you tend to have a very conservative approach towards risk. When we look at the distribution of your portfolio among different areas in different countries, there's an enormous concentration in Europe and the United States, a small amount going to smaller countries in Latin America, Middle East, and Africa. Yet, when you describe the areas where you are interested in investing, obviously the opportunities are in emerging market countries. And I can imagine that this is a dilemma for yourselves, because you have to produce results, you have stakeholders, you have to be profitable, you have to take risks in a responsible way, but at the same time, the opportunities are many times where the risks still exist, but the chances of having an enormous impact on societies and also of good returns in terms of projects. How do you approach this issue? Is there any chance that your portfolio is going to involve a larger number of countries in Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and other areas in the global south?
Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for a very interesting discussion as well. Let me start by saying that having a 70% equity share in a government pension fund, I would say signal that our owners are quite willing to take risk in terms of having accepted quite a lot of variability in annual returns in the expectation that that will generate higher expected returns. But you're right that most of the fund is invested in developed markets, mainly reflecting the global equity market as such, where market capitalization is one key factor entering into the definition of the benchmark index that the Ministry of Finance provides us with. In addition, we emphasize economic stability, political risks, but the main aspect of determining investment shares is really market capitalization. As regards to the investment strategy going forward, I guess that is for the Ministry of Finance to answer, in the sense that, as you know, the central bank manages the fund according to a mandate given to us by the Ministry of Finance, defined by a benchmark index, which closely mirrors the FTSE Global All Caps index, but it also lays down certain restrictions on where we can and cannot invest. Whether there is any imminent changes to that investment strategy, our minister might be able to answer that question.
Let me benefit from the fact that she gave you the floor to ask you a question, which is, how do you manage to take decisions on the fund? Do the recommendations come from the Ministry of Finance to the central bank, and the central bank just implements them? Or is there a team in the central bank that looks for projects and for opportunities? And how does it work?
Thank you, and it was very interesting to listening to your speech. It works slowly, yeah, and it's very important for my government, or for all governments in Norway, that if you are doing changes in the investment strategy, almost every party in the parliament shall support it. So every year we have a proposal for a thing called a white paper for the parliament. We are going through the results, the different sides with the fund. And if we're going to have changes, do changes in the investment strategy, we are discussing it with the parliament, and often through many years. For example, when we had this coal, when we have this made it forbid to invest in coal companies, I think we had this 2-3 years before we decided it. So then it goes from the parliament to the government, back to the parliament, and also we ask for advice also from the bank, and then we decided. So we are not rushing anything, because we are thinking that this fund stands in generations, and therefore also the political support to the fund is quite big. Of course, it also every year is a debate why we want to use a little more money. But I think also this generation thinking that we shall not use more money than that this fund is good also for the next generation. Have quite a broad support both in the population and also in the parliament.
Yeah, this is a question I entertained myself, because I understand that you consolidated this idea of ownership of natural resources, isn't it? Ownership. Society owns that. Society is they are the stakeholders and all that. And this is a concept that seems to be very consolidated in the fund. But you have the taxes themselves on the natural resources, and the levels of taxes and all that. And I can imagine that there's a big participation of Congress every year in discussing this detail. Is there a conflictual approach between the managers of the fund and Congress on a regular basis, or not necessarily?
It should be really wrong to call it a conflict, because of course it's a discussion about how we should manage the fund, but this is a very low conflict level. But we have the taxation. You asked about taxation also, because
Yes.
when we have this oil sector, we have direct oil, ownership through the Petoro, as you talked about, that we have a share in directly in the different oil felt. The different projects, but also we have Equinor, the oil company, and we have this taxation. So we have 3 different ways that we have income to the Norwegian state. And the taxation level is quite high, 78%. So that is, but it's a good tax system that get a big revenue back to the state, but also is good for investors, because they also have opportunity to, when they invest, they can avskriving på engelsk, hva er det for? Deduct when they have the investments. So that therefore it's also quite investments friendly. But in the end, when you have this income, it's 78% back to the state.
And to Nelson, I would like to ask you to develop a little bit more the idea of the involvement of the NDS in sustainability and sustainable projects in general. I think you were very successful in showing the capacity of the NDS to identify resources, to identify companies in which to invest, because they invest a lot in equity, as they described. But give us an idea of the new views of the NDS on sustainability and sustainable projects.
Well, I would like, we together with the Minister of Finance, with collaboration with Minister Haddad, we have upscaled an instrument called the Climate Fund that was created by President Lula in 2009, I think in one of those COP, I think it was in Denmark. This fund originally receives part of the federal oil rent. It was a very small fund. And in this administration, Mr. Haddad decided to increase the fund by issuing sustainable bonds. So it issued 2 billion sustainable bonds last year and 2 billion sustainable bonds last month. And this is a fund managed by BNDES. And what's the idea of this fund? Brazil borrows international US dollars, but the fund then was going to lend domestically in Brazilian currency at the same rate that it borrows in US dollars. So it borrowed in an average of 6.15 in US dollars last year, and it's lending, the base rate is 6.15, which by Brazilian standards is a low rate. Our current short-term rate is 10.5. And then on that, BNDES has managed that. There's a risk spread. So at the end of the day, the lending goes, reaches the final borrower around 7 to 8%. And it's channeled mostly through environmental issues. Renewable sources of energy, solar farms, wind farms, biofuels, the urban development, especially the electrification of urban transportation, electric buses, VLTs, subways, green industry, new technologies that reduce emission or increase energy efficiency, and also reforestation. Reforestation is still small because, as I said, most of the revenues are expected to come from selling carbon credits, but the carbon credit market right now is very mixed. You can have different qualities of carbon credits, almost like crypto assets. You have a credit that almost have no value, and credits are very expensive. So we are trying to develop a more comprehensive or trustworthy taxonomy, so that we will be able to issue carbon credits from this recovery of degraded lands. And using these funds, I believe this is already changing the scale of environmental financing in Brazil. Just to give you an idea, this $2 billion that were put, in average, it was 10 billion reais that were put in this fund last year. At this moment, you already receive demands for 40 billion reais, 4 times. And that's why the finance ministry already issued another tranche of sustainable bonds, raising the fund to 20 billion, and is going to do that in the next year. So this is an opportunity investment. 6.15 is a very large interest rate for Brazil. Brazil is not that risky. You're going to make a huge profit if you buy the bonds now, that the markets are in turmoil. We are volatile, but we are not that risky. If you're going to stay long, and you guys stay long, you're going to make a huge profit investing in Brazilian bonds.
Thank you. Well, there's a gentleman there, two gentlemen who have questions, please.
I can start. I have
One in front, the other, yes, you can
yes.
start. Although
According to Brazilian media reports, during the Bolsonaro regime, the Norway fund froze 134 million reais in aid to the Amazon. What was the result of these frozen funds? Is a tremendous deterioration in the Amazon? And when was this restored? Only when President Lula came in?
you want to say something?
I don't have the
elements
numbers
to
on the top
answer
of my head, and I don't answer for the Bolsonaro administration. I can say that during the Lula administration, we are applying the funds very carefully, and we're recovering its objectives that were set during its creation.
Very good. There's a gentleman in front in the previous row. Yes. Go ahead.
I guess my name is Eduardo. I'm from Hydro. I think it's both for BNDES and for the Norwegian government, both the fund and the minister. There's a lot of conversation about climate, and we see that the market is a big part of the solution for the climate issues. But from 2 years ago in Montreal, we see biodiversity using a similar framework with the nature positive targets. In Cali this year, we're going to see a lot of discussions about that. And while you say that I think it's 1.2%, you said, investment in Latin America and other places, I understand you still fund company that sources natural resources in Latin America. And I understand the fund in the ethic committee, there's more and more a risk assessment on biodiversity. Then I would like to understand from you, what's the trend of the risk in biodiversity? Since this is still an incipient discussion, it looks like it's going to pick up like climate did. How does the fund see that? And how is BNDES looking at that on the risk part in terms of looking at the industry that might be a solution and to decrease the risk associated to the industry that operates in the Amazon in terms of biodiversity?
Governor Vedder, would you like to answer?
I can say a few words about the fund's approach to biodiversity. We, a couple of years ago, published our first, what we refer to as our expectations documents on biodiversity and ecosystems, recognizing, of course, that this is key to a sustainable economic development over time, and therefore key to the long-run returns and the risks to our pension fund. But as you say, it's an incipient topic. It's a complicated and complex issue. So we're just sort of in the starting phase of that. We are also actively supporting supporting the task force on nature-related risks. So more data needed. We need standards, transparency, and disclosure, mirroring, I believe, the climate change area, although the complexity of biodiversity obviously is a lot larger, and they are related. So this is part of our responsible investment engagement. It's part of our dialogue with companies that have material risks in this area, and it's something that we will focus on also going forward. It has not in itself been a part of the ethical guidelines that we received from the Norwegian Parliament, although severe environmental damage is part of those criteria. But it's an important part of our responsible investment approach.
Would you like to, Nelson, would you like to say something?
Yeah, biodiversity is one of our concerns, but it's not an easy issue to tackle. Right now, BNDES has very strict guidelines in terms of land use. We use the Brazilian system of satellite monitoring in all of our agricultural landing. So if the system detects that you're exceeding your quota in terms of deforestation, that can ignite some stop clauses and early liquidation clauses. We also have very objective guidelines in terms of emissions, and we are also putting in place guidelines in terms of energy efficiency. The difficulty that we have now, we are discussing that together with the finance ministry, which is creating a Brazilian taxonomy, is how can we measure biodiversity? Because it's not as easy as to measure the land deforestation, because it's just a square meter satellite measure. Not as easy to measure as carbon emissions or energy efficiency, but we must do that. So we are actually seeing many methodologies to create a kind of index, a performance index related to biodiversity, to use that as one of the criteria of our lending, and use that possibly as a way to give interest rates incentives and penalties. But the main difficulty is more technical. There's no consensus among the experts on what's the best way to measure biodiversity today. But at some point, these things usually are complex. You have to start somewhere, and then you adapt. But that's what we're facing. I believe the Norwegian government is having the same difficulties with this issue.
Well, thank you very much. I was told that we have to finish. Do we have time for one more question? Yes, okay.
Okay, I guess we are over time.
There's another one, a lady down at the end. Two ladies.
I'm
yes.
talking here.
Go ahead.
Thank you. We're talking a lot about ESG, anti-corruption. Bakke was talking about that, how the bank decides where to invest. And I'm just having a question to BNDES, if how the bank are working with those types of topics, transparency, anti-corruption, and ESG. Yeah.
Let's take the other question as well, and then we finish.
Hello. I think my question is a little bit broad, but thinking of the Norwegian social protection model, what would be your main advice for us that, at least for me, I'm such an admirer of your model? What would be your main advices if you'd like to somehow emulate your model?
All right. Please. Minister.
Thank you. That is a short but really big question. And it's Brazil and Norway is really different countries, because we are just a little more than 5 million people. So it's much easier to be a government in Norway and to be a government in Brazil. So that is, and we have also different history. So that is really important in our discussion the politics with, in different countries. But I think one of the main values in the Norwegian system that we have had as a goal, that is it is a challenge for the society with the inequality are growing too much. And that is a debate all the time. And it is also it's quite a hard debate now, because when we had traditional income tax, it's quite easy to have different levels. But you have a quite big part of the population that almost don't pay income tax at all, but are really rich. So in Norway we have quite a big debate about wealth tax, and I get a lot of noise because of the wealth tax discussion. But the reason that we have a wealth tax in Norway is because we see that around quite among the most powerful and richest people in Norway, they almost pay not income tax at all, and therefore we have also this wealth tax system. But the main value is that we think that it's good for the society if the inequality is low. So we are working with that goal all the time. Of course, you shall have better income if you have good ideas, start companies, take big risks. But also you shall have a good life if you are a washing lady or a driver or a school teacher. So that is the goal. And we also have this goal that it's important that we have not too big differences between the cities and the rural areas. And that has been a goal for Norway. If you compare, for example, compare Norway with Sweden, they have that same goal. But we have the goal that we also shall have the development of the rural areas. I think that has been a success for Norway, but it is a debate all the time. And for the last 2 or 3 years, we had a new debate about the taxation of salmon farming. But therefore also there was some companies that have extremely high income, and therefore we meant that it's a good goal that some of that income should go to a broader part of the population. And in the end, it does now, but it's quite a hard cost if you take these kind of tax reforms. It got not very popular, but I think it's a good thing to do.
About ESG, or BNDES must comply with high ESG standards. First, because we borrow a lot internationally, so we have to attend to the lenders' criteria. Most of them come from Europe and the US, so we have to attend to that. But also, in the Brazilian society and Brazilian government also has very high ESG standards. Our audit authorities check us periodically about that. Our central bank checks us periodically about that. We must have a green balance, a social balance. We have to report that to the central bank, to Congress. And so BNDES has improved a lot its ESG policies in recent years. And regarding transparency, BNDES today is considered to be, by the audit authority, which is the highest authority on these issues in Brazil, the most transparent public institution in Brazil. If you go to the BNDES's website, you get information of most of the loans that you have, that the commercial clauses allow us to publish. You have the annual reports on the Amazon Fund, on the Climate Fund, on all the other funds that we manage, with their social impact, how much jobs are generated, because the Brazilian Constitution, BNDES was created as a worker-based. Our main funding comes from what's called a Workers' Assistance Fund, which comes from earmarking an indirect tax on payroll. And because of that, it was written in the Constitution that we must every year disclose how much jobs the BNDES's operations maintain or create in Brazil. So there's always room for improvement, but I can say that today in Brazil, there's no public institution that is more transparent than BNDES.
I think we have to close. Let's thank our panelists for a very interesting discussion about the Norwegian experience and the experience of BNDES with different projects and sustainability. Thank you all for your presence and for your attention and staying until the end. And I think this was really an interesting topic, an interesting discussion, showing that even brilliant conceptual ideas may have difficulties in implementation, but to my knowledge, what you have done is really very interesting and brilliant. And we hope that with time, you will be able to look better at the opportunities in Brazil and increase your investments in Brazil. Thank you very much.